At Thanksgiving dinner, my son poured hot pumpkin soup over my head and screamed, "You have 10 minutes to get out." 9 guests watched in horror as the burning liquid dripped down my face. But there was one thing he hadn't counted on. When I pulled the envelope from my pocket, his face went pale. He couldn't accept the hidden truth that was about to destroy everything. Before I tell you what was in that envelope that made Trevor's face go white, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I want to know how far this story about family secrets and Thanksgiving revenge has traveled. Everything started with what should have been a simple family gathering on a gray November morning in Seattle. But as I sat in Mr. Thornton's mahogany-paneled law office surrounded by the scent of old leather and decades of legal decisions, I had no idea that the next 30 minutes would tear my family apart forever. My father, Dr. Clarence Carter, had passed away 3 weeks earlier at 87. He'd been more than just a dad to me. He was my mentor, the man who taught me that being a surgeon meant carrying other people's lives in your hands with reverence. I expected his will reading to be straightforward, maybe even healing for our grieving family. I was wrong. Mr. Thornton, distinguished with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, opened the leather-bound document. Doctor, Clarence Carter's last will and testament is quite straightforward, though some of you may find certain provisions surprising. My son Trevor shifted beside me, his expensive suit rustling against the leather chair. At 35, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who expected the world to arrange itself for his convenience. Vanessa, his wife, sat like a perfectly groomed bird of prey, her manicured fingers drumming against her designer purse. To my various nephews and nieces, I leave $5,000 each. Mr. Thornton read, polite nods around the room. Expected gifts. To Seattle Medical Center, I leave $200,000 for the Clarence Carter Emergency Medicine Fellowship. That sounded exactly like Dad always thinking about future doctors. To my son Vincent Carter, I leave my house, my medical library, my art collection, and the remainder of my financial assets, totaling approximately $3.8 million. The words hit me like a physical blow. $3.8 million. I knew Dad was comfortable. But this? The room fell into stunned silence. Then Trevor exploded. What about me? His voice cut through the quiet like a blade. What about his grandson? Mr. Thornton continued reading. To my grandson Trevor Carter, I leave $38,000 along with my hope that he will finally understand the difference between earning something and expecting it. Trevor shot to his feet, his chair hitting the wall. This is impossible. $38,000, that's it. While he gets almost $4 million, his face went from pale to bright red as he pointed a shaking finger at me. This is fraud. You manipulated him, didn't you? You spent all that time with him, filling his head with lies about me. Trevor, please, I started. Don't you dare. You've been working on this for years, playing the perfect son while I was building my business, trying to make something of myself. Vanessa's eyes fixed on me with undisguised hostility. The other family members sat frozen, watching this family drama unfold like spectators at a car crash. I'm going to contest this, Trevor declared, his voice shaking with rage. I'm going to prove you manipulated a senile old man. This isn't over, Dad. This is just the beginning. Mr. Thornton cleared his throat diplomatically. If I may, your grandfather was evaluated by 3 separate physicians before his death. He was found to be in complete possession of his mental faculties. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. My name was written across it in Dad's distinctive handwriting. Dr. Carter, your father left specific instructions that this be given to you today after the reading of the will. As my fingers closed around the envelope, I could feel its weight, not just the physical weight of the paper, but the weight of whatever truth my father had wanted me to understand. Trevor's eyes fixed on the envelope like a hawk spotting prey. What is that? What else did he leave you? But I was already standing, tucking the envelope into my jacket pocket. Whatever my father had written, it wasn't meant for this room full of anger and accusations. The silence in my home office felt deafening after the chaos at the law firm. I sat behind the same desk where I'd studied for medical school, where I'd made countless career decisions. Under my reading lamp's warm glow, I held Dad's final message. The red wax seal bore his old medical school ring's imprint. My hands trembled as I broke it open, revealing 3 pages of his distinctive handwriting, the same careful script I'd seen on prescription pads throughout my childhood. My dear Vincent, it began If you're reading this, then the hardest part of your life is about to begin. I could almost hear his calm, measured voice. By now you've seen Trevor's reaction to my will. You're wondering why I divided my estate this way. The answer is simple. This is a test. A test. I lean back, processing his words. I've watched Trevor since he became a man. I've watched him expect success without effort, demand respect without earning it, and blame everyone else when life doesn't bend to his will. I've also watched you enable this behavior, giving him money when he failed, making excuses for his mistakes, cushioning every fall. The words stung because they were true. How many times had I bailed Trevor out? How many failed business ventures had I quietly funded? Trevor has potential, but potential means nothing without character. Character is forged in the fire of consequences, not in the comfort of endless second chances. Dad's handwriting grew shakier here, and I could picture him in his final weeks, choosing each word carefully. Your inheritance isn't a reward, son. It's a tool. Use it wisely to help Trevor find his way, but don't make the journey easy for him. Let him struggle. Let him fail. Let him discover what he's truly made of when everything is at stake. I set the letter down my chest, tight. Dad hadn't just left me money. He'd left me a responsibility, heavier than any surgery I'd performed. The second page contained specific instructions for what he called guided consequences. He'd planned this with the same precision he'd applied to complex medical cases. Watch him carefully in the coming months. His true nature will emerge when the pressure builds. He may surprise you. People often do when they have no choice but to grow. But if he chooses blame and self-pity, if he tries to destroy you rather than build himself up, then you'll know what kind of man he really is. The final page was the hardest to read. I know this burden feels unfair, Vincent. You didn't ask to be your son's teacher in this harsh curriculum, but you're the only one who can do it. You have the strength, the wisdom, and the love required. Love him enough to let him fail. Love him enough to let him face consequences. Love him enough to step back when stepping forward would rob him of the chance to become the man he could be. It was signed simply, with all my love and faith in you, Dad. I folded the pages carefully and sat in the growing darkness. Outside, Seattle's evening traffic hummed, but inside, everything felt suspended. Dad had given me more than money. He'd given me a mission that would test everything I thought I knew about fatherhood. Trevor was about to face the consequences of a lifetime of poor choices, and I was supposed to watch guide from the shadows and resist every parental instinct to rescue him. The test had begun, and I wasn't sure who was being tested more, Trevor or me. The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning 2 weeks after Dad's funeral. I was preparing for surgery, reviewing patient charts over my morning coffee when the doorbell rang. The process server was polite, but firm legal documents requiring my signature. Trevor was suing me. More precisely, he was suing Dad's estate, claiming mental incompetence and undue influence. The papers accused me of manipulating an elderly man for financial gain, of isolating him from his grandson, of systematically turning him against Trevor, over months or years. Reading those allegations felt like being punched in the stomach. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd paid without hesitation. Now he was calling me a manipulator and a thief in legal documents that would become public record. Dad's warning echoed in my mind. His true nature will emerge when the pressure builds. The next 6 months became a nightmare of depositions, document reviews, and family meetings that felt more like war councils. Trevor had hired Davidson, Pierce and Associates, one of Seattle's most aggressive litigation firms. They demanded medical records, financial statements, and testimony from anyone who'd spent time with Dad in his final years. Our extended family was forced to choose sides. My sister Betty stood by me, but her husband Mark remained neutral, claiming he didn't want to get involved in family drama. 2 of Dad's nephews testified for Trevor, swayed by his argument that the will was obviously unfair and therefore suspicious. The worst part was watching Trevor transform during those months. The charming, confident man I'd raised disappeared, replaced by someone bitter and calculating. He sat in depositions with his jaw clenched, his eyes cold, answering questions about his relationship with his grandfather in clipped, resentful tones. Vanessa played her role perfectly, the concerned daughter-in-law who'd noticed Dad's increasing confusion in recent years. She testified about conversations that never happened, moments of supposed senility that were complete fabrications. Watching her lie under oath while maintaining her perfectly composed expression made my skin crawl. My legal team, led by Catherine Westbrook, methodically dismantled their case. Dad's medical records showed no signs of cognitive decline. His longtime physician, Dr. Rodriguez, testified that Dad had been sharp and decisive, right up until his final week. The 3 psychiatric evaluations Trevor's lawyers had demanded all confirmed the same thing. Clarence Carter had been in full possession of his mental faculties when he revised his will. But the most damaging evidence came from Dad himself. Catherine discovered he'd been secretly recording conversations with Trevor for over a year, documenting instances where my son had demanded money, made threats, or showed complete disrespect for the man who'd helped raise him. "You owe me, Grandpa." Trevor's voice came through the courtroom speakers during one particularly damaging recording. "I'm your only grandson. When you die, everything should come to me, not him. He already has his doctor money." I watched Trevor's face crumble as his own words condemned him. Even his expensive lawyers couldn't spin that level of entitlement and callousness. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Williams, delivered her ruling on a gray February morning. The courtroom was packed with family members, curious onlookers, and legal students observing what had become a locally famous case. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, Judge Williams said, "This court finds no evidence of mental incompetence or undue influence. Dr. Clarence Carter's will stands as written." The plaintiff's motion to invalidate is denied in its entirety. Trevor had spent nearly $40,000, his entire inheritance, on legal fees, plus additional money I suspected came from credit cards or loans. He'd lost everything, including the respect of anyone who'd witnessed his behavior during the proceedings. As we filed out of the courtroom, I tried to catch his eye, hoping for some sign of the son I remembered. But Trevor walked past me as if I were a stranger, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. He'd become exactly what Dad had feared, a man who would rather destroy his family than accept responsibility for his own failures. After losing the lawsuit, I watched Trevor's world begin to unravel from a distance. As a father, every instinct told me to reach out to help to fix whatever was going wrong. But Dad's letter echoed in my mind, let him face the consequences of his choices. The first signs came through mutual acquaintances in Portland's business community. Trevor's consulting firm was hemorrhaging clients. Word had spread about his failed legal challenge, and in a city where reputation mattered, his had become toxic overnight. Former clients quietly moved their business elsewhere, unwilling to associate with someone who'd publicly attacked his own family. I heard rumors through the medical community's network doctors talk, and several colleagues had connections to Portland businesses. Trevor was struggling to pay basic operating expenses. His office lease was behind by 2 months. The expensive suits and luxury car that had been his trademark were showing signs of strain. But I didn't realize how deep the hole had become until the phone calls started reaching me indirectly. A colleague mentioned that Trevor had applied for a loan, using my name as a reference without asking permission. Another doctor friend in Portland casually mentioned seeing Vanessa at the grocery store looking stressed and asking odd questions about budgeting. The most troubling sign came when my sister Betty called in July. She'd run into Vanessa at a charity event, and something seemed off. Vanessa had always been perfectly put together, but that night she looked exhausted, distracted. When Betty asked about Trevor's business, Vanessa's smile had been too bright, her answers too rehearsed. "I think they're having money problems," Betty told me over the phone. Real problems, not just the usual cash flow issues Trevor always complained about. Part of me wanted to call him to offer help, to bridge the gap that had opened between us since the lawsuit. But every time I reached for the phone, I remembered Dad's words, "Love him enough to let him fail." What I couldn't see from Seattle was the full extent of Trevor's desperation. I didn't know about the forged loan documents, the maxed-out credit cards, or the predatory lenders who were circling like vultures. I had no idea he'd taken out a second mortgage on his house without telling Vanessa, or that he'd discovered online gambling as a way to try to solve his problems. All I knew was that the son who had once called me every week for advice, who had shared his business successes and failures, had gone completely silent. No calls, no texts, no contact at all. The silence felt ominous, but I convinced myself it was part of his learning process. I told myself that Trevor was finally growing up, finally taking responsibility for his own life. I believed that the lack of contact meant he was working through his problems independently, maybe even beginning to understand what Dad had been trying to teach him. I was wrong about everything. The reality was that Trevor was drowning, making increasingly desperate choices that pushed him further from any possibility of redemption. While I maintained my professional distance, believing I was following Dad's wise counsel, my son was destroying what remained of his life with a thoroughness that would have impressed me if it hadn't been so tragic. I had no idea how far he'd fallen until Mr. Garrison called me. Mr. Garrison's call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was between surgeries. I almost didn't answer. Bank managers rarely called with good news, but something in his tone made me step into an empty consultation room. "Dr. Carter, I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a situation with your son's mortgage that requires immediate attention." My blood ran cold. "What kind of situation?" "Trevor received a 30-day foreclosure notice yesterday. He's behind on both his primary mortgage and a second mortgage he took out in June. The total amount needed is $78,000 plus penalties." I sank into the chair. $78,000. Trevor had mortgaged his house twice without telling anyone. The scope of his collapse was worse than I'd imagined. "Why are you calling me? Shouldn't Trevor handle his own affairs?" "Your son listed you as his emergency contact. Normally, we wouldn't reach out to family, but given your reputation in the community, I thought you should know." "My reputation?" The unspoken message was clear. As a successful surgeon, I was Trevor's most likely rescue source. "Has Trevor asked you to call me?" "No, sir. He specifically requested we not contact family members. But Dr. Carter, if this foreclosure proceeds, he'll lose everything." After hanging up, I sat there for 20 minutes, hands trembling with the weight of an impossible decision. Dad's letter was clear. Help him, but let him learn. But what kind of help was this? If I paid Trevor's mortgages directly, he'd learn nothing, except that Daddy would always clean up his messes. If I did nothing, he'd lose everything, and any chance of redemption might disappear. That's when the idea came a way to help without enabling, to provide safety without removing consequences. I called Mr. Garrison back. If someone were to purchase Trevor's mortgage debt, what would that process look like? It's complicated, but not impossible. The bank would sell the debt to recover our investment. Are you thinking of... I'm thinking of options. Could such a purchase be made anonymously? 3 days later, I sat in a conference room with Mr. Garrison and 2 real estate attorneys signing papers that made me owner of my son's house. The legal structure was complex, a limited liability company created specifically for this purpose, with my ownership buried behind layers of corporate paperwork. The total cost was $85,000, enough to pay off both mortgages, cover penalties, and purchase the debt outright. It was a fraction of Dad's inheritance, but it felt like the most expensive decision I'd ever made. Trevor never knew how close he'd come to losing everything. From his perspective, the bank had simply restructured his loans at the last minute, giving him breathing room he didn't deserve. He probably thought his charm had finally worked, that he'd talked his way out of disaster one more time. What he didn't know was that his father now owned his house, held his future, in hands guided by a dead man's wisdom about the difference between love and enabling. I became Trevor's landlord without him knowing it, watching from Seattle as he continued making the same mistakes that had brought him to financial ruin's edge. Every month, mortgage payments came from an account I controlled. Every month, I wondered if this was what Dad had meant by helping him learn. 3 months passed in complete silence. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening in November, 4 months after I'd secretly purchased Trevor's house. I was reviewing surgical notes when his name appeared on my caller ID, the first time in over a year that he'd reached out to me directly. "Dad," his voice sounded different, softer somehow, less combative than during our last conversation outside the courthouse. "Trevor," I set down my pen, unsure what to expect. "I know it's been a long time since we talked. I know things ended badly between us, and I've been doing a lot of thinking lately." There was a pause, and I could hear something in the background, Vanessa's voice, maybe music playing softly. "I was wondering if you'd like to come to Portland for Thanksgiving dinner. Nothing fancy, just family. Vanessa and I have been talking, and we think it's time to try to heal some of the wounds that have opened up between us." My chest tightened. For months I'd been watching from the shadows, wondering if Dad's test was working, if Trevor was finally learning the lessons that financial pressure was supposed to teach. This call felt like the answer I'd been hoping for. That sounds nice, Trevor. Are you sure?" "I'm sure, Dad. I've realized some things about myself, about how I've been acting. I know I said some terrible things during the lawsuit, made some accusations that weren't fair. I'd like a chance to apologize properly, to start over, if that's possible." The words sounded genuine, but something nagged at me. Trevor had always been charming when he wanted something. Still, what father doesn't want to believe his son has grown, has learned from his mistakes? When were you thinking? Thanksgiving Day around 4 o'clock. Just us, Vanessa, and a few close friends. Nothing overwhelming, I promise. After we hung up, I sat in my study for a long time, staring at Dad's letter, which I'd kept in my desk drawer. Was this what he'd meant? Had the pressure finally worked? Had Trevor genuinely learned something from nearly losing everything? The drive to Portland on Thanksgiving afternoon felt surreal. I was going to have dinner in a house I owned, invited by a son who had no idea his father held the deed. The autumn landscape blurred past my windshield as I wrestled with conflicting emotions, hope warring with caution, love battling with hard-earned skepticism. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked perfect. Too perfect. The lawn was immaculately maintained, the house freshly painted, seasonal decorations, arranged with magazine-worthy precision. For someone who'd been facing financial ruin just months ago, Trevor seemed to be doing remarkably well. Trevor answered the door with a smile that seemed genuine, wearing a sweater I'd never seen before, and an expression of what looked like sincere contrition. "Dad, thank you so much for coming. This means everything to us." Vanessa appeared beside him, equally warm and welcoming. "Vincent, we're so glad you're here. We've missed you." They led me through the house, my house pointing out small improvements they'd made, chatting about the weather, the traffic, anything except the elephant in the room. The dining room had been transformed into something from a home and garden magazine. The table was set with china. I didn't recognize crystal glasses that caught the light from an elaborate centerpiece, candles flickering in silver holders. But it was the number of place settings that made my stomach drop. 8 chairs around the table with a 9th added at what appeared to be the last minute. "I hope you don't mind," Trevor said, noticing my expression. "We invited a few friends to join us. We thought it would be nice to have you meet some of the people who've become important to us." As if on cue, voices came from the living room, laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses. Trevor and Vanessa exchanged a glance that lasted just a fraction of a second too long. That's when I knew. This wasn't reconciliation. This was something else entirely. 9 people were seated around my dining table, and every one of them was staring at me. 9 witnesses to what would become my greatest humiliation. That's what I walked into that Thanksgiving evening, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to destroy me in the most public way possible. The guests were strategically positioned, Kenneth and Patricia Morrison, Trevor's former business partners, Bradley and Jennifer Walsh from his country club, Marcus and Lisa Chen, neighbors who'd always admired Trevor's apparent success, Derek Hamilton, his college roommate, and Amanda, Vanessa's younger sister. All people whose opinions mattered in Portland's social circles. Dinner proceeded normally through the first course with polite conversation about the weather, local news, and holiday plans. But as Vanessa served the main course roasted turkey with all the traditional fixings, Trevor's demeanor began to shift. "You know," Trevor said, his voice carrying clearly across the table, "I think it's time everyone here knew the truth about my father." The conversation died instantly. All eyes turned toward us. For months I've been wondering why my life fell apart so completely after Grandpa's death, why my business failed, why my finances collapsed, why everything I touched seemed to crumble. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't reconciliation, this was an ambush. And then I discovered something fascinating. Trevor continued standing up slowly, his napkin falling to the floor. I discovered that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones orchestrating your destruction from the shadows. "Trevor, what are you talking about?" I tried to keep my voice calm, but I could hear the tremor in it. "I'm talking about control, Dad. I'm talking about manipulation. I'm talking about a father who couldn't stand to see his son succeed independently, so he made sure that son would always need him." The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke. They were transfixed by the drama unfolding before them. "Tell them, Dad," Trevor said, his voice growing louder, more aggressive. "Tell them how you manipulated Grandpa into changing his will. Tell them how you made sure I got almost nothing while you walked away with millions." "That's not true, Trevor, and you know it. Your grandfather made his own decisions. Tell them how you've been secretly controlling my life ever since—" Trevor's voice was rising to a shout now. "Tell them how you bought my house out from under me and have been playing puppet master for months." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. I felt 9 pairs of eyes boring into me, waiting for my response. "Trevor, you don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly," he screamed. "You couldn't stand that Grandpa saw through your perfect son act and gave me what I deserved, so you spent years poisoning his mind against me? That's absolutely not true, I said, standing up to face him. Your grandfather loved you, but he was concerned about your character, about your sense of entitlement. Shut up. Trevor's face was bright red now, veins bulging in his neck. Just shut up with your lies. He reached for the serving bowl of creamy pumpkin soup that sat in the center of the table, still steaming hot from the kitchen. The ceramic bowl was heavy, filled with the rich orange liquid that Vanessa had ladled out moments before. You want to control everything, Trevor snarled, lifting the bowl above his head. You want to manipulate everyone around you. Let's see how you handle this. The soup was scalding as it cascaded over my head and shoulders, soaking through my hair, burning my scalp, running down my neck and chest. The thick, creamy liquid mixed with chunks of roasted pumpkin clung to my face and clothes. The smell of sage and nutmeg filled my nostrils as I gasped from the shock and pain. The room fell into horrified silence as I sat there dripping with soup, my white shirt now stained orange, my dignity stripped away in front of 9 strangers. Trevor stood over me, the empty bowl still in his hands, his chest heaving with rage and satisfaction. You have 10 minutes to get out of my house, he screamed, pointing toward the door with a shaking finger. 10 minutes to get out of my life forever. Some of the guests looked horrified, but others I noticed with sick fascination seemed almost entertained by the spectacle. A few were even smirking as if they were watching some kind of performance art. As I wiped the hot soup from my eyes with my napkin, I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the envelope I'd been carrying for months. Dad's final lesson waiting for exactly this moment. 10 minutes. 10 minutes to reveal 10 months of hidden truths. As I sat there with pumpkin soup dripping from my hair, I realized this was the moment Dad had been preparing me for, not just to help Trevor learn, but to learn something myself about the difference between love and enabling. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the manila envelope I'd been carrying since that first phone call from Mr. Garrison. But this wasn't Dad's letter. This was something I'd prepared for exactly this moment. You want to talk about manipulation, Trevor? I said quietly, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. You want to discuss control? I opened the envelope and spread its contents across the soup-stained tablecloth. Legal documents, bank statements, mortgage papers, all bearing Trevor's forged signatures and fabricated information. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, addressing the 9 witnesses who sat frozen in their chairs, let me tell you about the real Trevor Carter. Trevor's face went white as he recognized the documents. These are loan applications where my son inflated his income by 300%. These are bank statements he doctored to qualify for credit cards he couldn't afford. And this, I held up a thick folder, is documentation of the $75,000 second mortgage he took out on this house without telling his wife. Vanessa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. What, Trevor? What is he talking about? He's lying, Trevor shouted, but his voice cracked. Those documents are fake. Are they I pulled out my phone and played a recording. Trevor's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable, talking to a loan officer about falsifying employment records. I had this house investigated when the foreclosure notice was filed. I continued, my voice steady despite the soup still burning my scalp. Did you know your husband owes over $200,000 to various creditors? Did you know he's been gambling online with money from a predatory lender? Vanessa turned to stare at her husband, horror dawning in her eyes. Trevor, is this true? But I wasn't finished. I pulled out the final document, the deed to the house. And this, Trevor, is the deed to your home. The home you've been living in for the past 4 months, believing you'd somehow talked your way out of foreclosure. Trevor lunged for the papers, but I held them away from him. The truth is, son, I own this house. I have owned it since August, when I purchased your mortgage debt to save you from losing everything. Every month for 4 months, I've been paying your mortgage, your insurance, your property taxes. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Kenneth and Patricia exchanged glances. Bradley shook his head in disbelief. Marcus whispered something to Lisa that made her eyes widen. You've been living in my house, eating food bought with money I provided, all while planning this elaborate revenge against the man who saved you from homelessness. Trevor's face cycled through emotions, shock, rage, humiliation, and finally, something that might have been understanding. But it was too late for understanding. I stood up, soup still dripping from my clothes, and walked around the table to where Trevor stood trembling. This was your grandfather's final test, I said quietly so only he could hear. Not for you, for me. He wanted to see if I could love you enough to let you fail and strong enough to walk away when you chose destruction over growth. I handed him the deed to the house. This house is yours again, Trevor, free and clear. Consider it my final gift to you. His hand shook as he took the document. But understand this, I continued, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. I'm no longer your father. You are no longer my son. There will be no more phone calls, no more bailouts, no more second chances. You wanted to be free of my manipulation. Congratulations. You're completely free. I turned to address the room one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for witnessing this. I hope you'll remember this evening the next time someone tells you about Vincent Carter's terrible treatment of his son. As I walked toward the door, Trevor called out behind me. Dad, wait, I didn't mean. I stopped at the threshold without turning around. You meant every word, Trevor. And for the first time in your life, you're going to live with the consequences of meaning what you said. I walked out of that house, my house, Trevor's house, nobody's house now, and into the cold Portland night. Behind me, I could hear voices rising in argument. Vanessa demanding answers, guests making hasty excuses to leave. Dad's test was complete. I had learned to balance love with boundaries, to choose difficult truth over comfortable lies. Trevor would have to learn his own lessons now without me. For the first time in years, I felt free. Looking back on this painful journey, I realized that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to step away. My father understood something I didn't, that true family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about mutual respect and genuine care. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't enable the people you love by shielding them from consequences. I spent years thinking I was being a good father by rescuing Trevor from his failures, but I was actually preventing him from becoming the man he could have been. God gave us free will for a reason, even when it breaks our hearts, to watch someone we love make destructive choices. These grandpa stories taught me that wisdom often comes wrapped in difficult packages. My father's final test wasn't cruel. It was merciful. He knew that some lessons can only be learned through struggle, and some growth only happens when we face our failures alone. This true story changed everything I thought I knew about parenting and love. Sometimes loving someone means letting them fall. Sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is trust that God has a plan, even when we can't see it. The Lord works through our struggles, not despite them. What I learned from these grandpa stories is that real love requires courage. The courage to set boundaries, to say no, to walk away when staying would only enable destruction. This true story isn't just mine, it's every parent's struggle to love wisely rather than just emotionally. God's grace covers our mistakes, but His wisdom teaches us when to step back and let Him work. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is trust that the people we care about are also in His hands. If this true story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you faced similar challenges with family boundaries? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more life-changing stories that remind us we're never alone in our struggles.